So we are looking forward to our panel number 3 to really look at therapeutics beyond in a way. So we would love to welcome you. And we have typically started our conversation with the panel, and also considering that we are running a tiny bit behind, to jumpstart with introductions, and then the reason why you're passionate about this space, and then we can go into questions and answers. So with that, I see Ben on the first tile next to me, so I would love to welcome you to the panel.
Well, thank you so much. I'm Ben Lewis, the CEO and co-founder of Limbix. We create digital therapeutics to treat adolescent mental health disorders. I'm very passionate about the space because there is a growing global health crisis in treating mental health issues across all ages, but particularly within adolescents. And while digital therapeutics might not be a full panacea, the fact is they can play a key and important role in helping to solve the problem. And so I'm really passionate about exploring that.
Great, thank you, Ben. I see Nanea next to me. And next Ben, yes, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Nanea, Reeves, CEO of Tripp, and happy to be here with such an august group of colleagues working in the space. Tripp is an entirely new way to meditate. We like to say we're building the mindful metaverse. We have the largest audience in consumer XR wellness. We just launched a major augmented reality app update yesterday on the new Meta Quest Pro device, as well as the Meta Quest, that we're very, very proud of. And we have an interesting approach to gamification, because I think a lot of gamification attempts in the mental health and wellness space, I sometimes call lamification. Game balancing is really hard. Ben has also come from the game industry, and it's not something that a clinician can just tack on at the end of the experience. It has to be core. So one of the things, I will represent on this is the voice of that, because true adherence, if we want to build solutions that will really be effective, they must retain engagement on an ongoing basis to have real impact. And so we've already seen some epic failures because of the lack of engagement. So it's not something to be ignored, and it really has to be integral to the core product design.
Excellent. And yes, we are here to discuss the new and the old, all therapeutics today. So Mainul, welcome. Can you share more about yourself, your organization, and your passion?
Thank you, Archana. Thanks, Bambi. Nanea and Ben, good to see you again. Sorry Steve couldn't make it, but this is a highly, highly interesting topic for me. Thinking about God, thinking about psychedelics, AI, all the measurement tools, so super interesting. I'm the founder and CEO of Ellipsis Health. We're solving 2 problems. By next year, we should be a standard of care for a measurement tool for depression and anxiety. And the year after, we're solving the other problem, which is going to be the demand and supply issue, and instead of in mental health, right? We'll never have enough providers. So Ellipsis Health is going to build an avatar-based therapy, right? So you're able to do assessment on a standard of care measurement tool, and then to be able to triage to different intervention, one being Ellipsis intervention. And I think Ben and Nanea, you guys have worked on really, really interesting stuff as well. And we've talked about partnerships in the past. So this is super, super relevant, how we can all connect and make a difference.
Great.
Yeah, I think the integration of biometric feedback loops, we're demonstrating something next month where it's really exciting connection. And I think this is an area of great innovation that's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is going to happen. If you think about all our sort of efforts that we are doing on our own, right? You guys are working on, all of us, if you even talk about Steve, right? We're all working about different modalities. One being God, the other one being sort of VR. We are working on AI, we talk about psychedelics, but the combined thought is, how does one look from outside to inside? That we're doing. The sense of presence, right? That's what we are creating. And how Ellipsis Health sort of turbocharges that is understanding the cells of presence. How is somebody doing? Measurement tool for depression, anxiety, and other things, right? How do you actually measure whether its interventions are being effective? So combined with Ben's work, Nanea's work, and all the work that we're around, could be a very powerful combination. And to be very candid about it, I think that mental health is going to go through a massive positive change in how we perceive it, how we understand it, and how we have an impact in the next year and a half.
Yeah, I'd like to say, we think of mental health as just health, shouldn't be differentiated as some subcategory. And as we understand the mind-body connection more, that becomes even more evident that we need to shift it into just health.
Absolutely. And to that point, like in our first panelist, Dr. James, did talk about the mind-body connection. How if one is off, for example, there is a mental health issue, it's leading to eating disorders causing cardiometabolic conditions. So there is definite connection there. How about we go through what the patient journey looks like? So we start from the diagnostic, which is Mainul, I'm going to pick on you. And then we go into the therapeutics, which is Nanea and Ben. So Mainul, can you talk about what is that patient experience looks like when they are interacting with Ellipsis? Like, what is it that your technology is doing?
Yeah.
And what are the endpoints in measuring, and what allows you to then go into the therapeutics?
No. I think the entry point is obviously needs to be very thoughtful and intentional. And in our case, we are a B2B only working with sort of providers and payers.
Mm-hmm.
So in our case, there are two product lines, and we have to be at the front lines, right? How do you help a primary care physician? How do you help a case manager to be able to understand the level of depression and anxiety, to be able to measure real time so that they can route it to a proper intervention? So our first product line, we are basically on PCP calls, case management calls, and doing real-time analysis, classifications of depression and anxiety, right? And subclinical stress as well, right? So that at the point of care, right, you think about this, it takes about 11 years from the time you show symptoms to getting care. All of a sudden, your PCP case managers are able to provide that care right away, right? The power of that. So the way it fits in, the assessment is being done when you're having a conversation, natural dialogue with your PCP case manager. It flags on the screen from a very clinical setting, the level of depression, anxiety, and stress, and then the intervention, right? Intervention depends on severity, right? Now, if it's severe, go to a psychiatrist, right? In the future, it'll be Ellipsis intervention looking at the avatar-based therapy. It could go to Ben's, it could go to Nanea's, right? All this intervention. So that's how it happens: assessment, triage, and intervention. Now, the other thing that I heard sort of in the last sort of panel, you have to meet where the users are,
Mm-hmm.
right? Absolutely. And so for us, how do you know how someone is doing, how your patient member is doing in between visits? You don't, right? Now, in Nanea's case and Ben's case, obviously you've intervention there. We have a voice journaling system, right? How are you doing? Open in a dialogue, and what do you want to leave for your next therapy appointment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And speech is powerful. It's a super powerful engine to say how someone is actually doing. So at that, when you're doing the voice journaling, it's doing the same thing in the background: assessment and triaging. And if somebody's going to trend not in a good way, then we flag it and say, hey, this is a 911, or this is a psychiatry interview, versus an Ellipsis sort of mild to moderate intervention, or Nanea's or Ben's, right? So thinking through that, that's how we plug in.
So one follow-up question to the intervention is accuracy and privacy. So how are you addressing, what is your accuracy level? Are you, with going upstream, are you increasing utilization? Is that something that is positive? And then the second part is privacy. So, voice is ever pervasive, and who would give you access to the voice? I know that people are doing it for Alexa and Google Homes all the time, but would they for your intervention?
Yeah, and make this very clear. If you sort of search my comments from 4 or 5 years back, when we started Ellipsis Health speech, we've always said we are not working with Alexa, we're not working with Google Home. We will not do that. Every single data that we have in Ellipsis' database is labeled and is with consent. And we'll continue keep that true north for us. So our application is always in the healthcare setting, right? And you go through sort of a consent process so that you know exactly, and you don't have to opt in, you can opt out, right? We give the power to the individual. So, and that's one of the reasons we have always said we're going to always stick to the healthcare setting because already trust there, right? And this is for care. So that's, and then we take, not just consent and privacy, security extremely serious, and we all do. I mean, and we should be. This is healthcare. So we have, for example, the former head of security for the New York Stock Exchange is helping us guide through all sorts of security measures, right? Mm-hmm. So those are at the core. Clinical validation is at the core. And if you think about sort of, look, I mean, I'm from San Francisco. The folks who are from Detroit, very different economic resources around us. So our goal is that how do you sort of scale Ellipsis Health to anyone and everyone, whether you're sitting in Silicon Valley or sitting in Detroit or sitting in Austin, right? So for us to be able to use voice being captured in a private, secure way during a clinical encounter, doing the assessment, and going back to what Ellipsis Health is building, which is the avatar-based therapist at a very, very cheap rate. So a mom who's got 3 jobs and have got kids to manage doesn't have to think about the cost, doesn't have to think about what's present in a network. She can get that care right away.
That's great. So with that, I would like to move into Nanea and the solutions at Tripp. What does that patient experience look like? And what are the end goal that or objectives that you're trying to achieve, or metrics you're trying to measure in the outcome of this therapeutic solution?
Our main focus right now is on consumer wellness and getting tools in the hands of the user to start to get this sense of agency over how they feel. Even just asking the question at the beginning and the end of all of our experiences, how do you feel, in and of itself is it's a door opening. We don't make any therapeutic claims, and we want to have a huge body of evidence to support any claims that we will make in the future. That being said, because we are so broadly available and our focus is to be the next gen mindfulness application on these head mounted displays that are starting to ship out, that we can start to collect a lot of data and information and use that in our research in de-identified forms and work with academics and clinicians. So our app has been studied in the categories of attention with adolescents and over a duration. So, we have an active study with schizophrenics at the New York Office of Mental Health and Manhattan Psychiatric. There's a study working with NASA astronauts that we're shipping a bunch of devices to Antarctica for stress impact on immune. So really, we're in the data collection standpoint. On the clinical side, our first pilot that we are testing right now is how do we support ketamine treatments with the psychedelic naive to reduce their anxiety before the first session, and then gauge specifically their anxiety level going into the second session. And it's being run by an entity that helped with the S-ketamine deployment. So we're still in early stages. And I do want to say, caution is definitely needed in this area of digital therapeutics. I believe we need much more published data all around as an industry before we can start to say, do this as opposed to the current treatments that are available. And our industry as a whole needs to be mindful, while still maintain a culture of innovation, and we're all very enthusiastic about it, but there's definitely, I don't see enough data to back up some of the statements sometimes I see out there.
So as a follow-up question, especially you are treading the line of legality versus who knows what the wild west looks like. So how are you navigating that and
Sure.
still having a very publicly or direct to consumer solution?
Yeah, so we definitely, have to comply with GDPR compliance, PCI compliance, CCPA compliance, and we just hired someone who is a HIPAA compliance expert, as well as we start to work with more clinical efforts on the research side. And on the privacy side, right now, our main focus is to use any biosignals that we're capturing, whether it's pupil measurement or heart rate or respiratory rate, as a biofeedback loop, not doing any diagnostics on the consumer side, and not putting any of that data on our server with any kind of PII, or even collecting it from certain territories and regions. So, Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford had a really interesting study where he was able to create a digital fingerprint from head tracking data, that within 40 seconds. So I do believe we have to proceed with caution on how we take personal biometric data and start to work with that. So being involved with all the ethics committees, being overly cautious about it, dealing with all the lawyers, and really, because it is an informed data process flow, and you want to build that in the beginning. Ben and I both run big tech organizations. You can't go back and refactor. It's very costly to go back and refactor after the fact. So
Right.
you look at QMS and ISO standards, et cetera. So all of that's been in the works from the onset of our design, even if we're not deployed currently in therapeutic settings.
Okay.
And I think Archana, Nanea, and Ben, it's a really good point you bring up, especially in consumer health, to be able to bring the evidence and support the evidence and publish. I think you guys are leading the field on that, and kudos to you. Absolutely, because consumer health and wellness is such a nebulous gray zone, and this is the kind of work we need in that space. Kudos to you all.
Well, you talk about the patient journey. It starts with the choices that we make before getting the diagnosis, and also the environments that we're in, and having certain tools and support throughout, right? And understanding, and then, so if we can help people just be mindfully aware of how they're feeling, being able to check in with themselves, encourage them to be open to asking for help, that it's okay. There's lots of messaging. Tripp has had huge organic adoption from active military and veteran community. It was tremendous during the pandemic. And, we want to also provide connections and resources to extended support. And when you think about the container of VR and the psychological safety that you can create, especially with people who might be embarrassed to be seen being emotional in a group setting, these are excellent use cases for the metaverse, where you can have what I call this digital veil that in and of itself can be, mechanisms to help people find better support.
Well, I think it ties in with the whole topic, right? Talking about God and the psychedelics and the VR. All of them, sort of entail letting go of yourself and being able to empathize, looking from outside to inside and feel connected. So really good point.
So going into to Ben's solutions. Thank you, Nanea, on that. What would the patient journey look like if as they are working with your therapeutic solution, and what are the outcomes that you are striving towards?
So one of the things that probably differentiates us from a lot of consumer health companies is that we are technically a regulated product. So we're members of the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, and our products are going through rigorous clinical trials and are subject to all the standards and requirements of the federal government. And we are submitting our clinical data to the FDA to be cleared the same way they clear pharmaceuticals. So you have to run, multiple clinical trials. Usually there is a placebo control arm for those trials in order to prove that your products are safe and effective. And it means your products are built on a quality management system like Nanea referred to. You're also, of course, subject to all the HIPAA and security requirements as you might expect. And so, our patient journey starts with the provider. You can't download our product and use it. That's one of the key things. You can't download any digital therapeutic as defined by the DTA without being authorized by a provider. And so there's two types, really. There's prescription digital therapeutics where you need an MD to prescribe the product. Or our case, we can be authorized by any licensed healthcare provider because we really wanted to allow school counselors and other behavioral health professionals to authorize our products. So they can authorize it. So what usually happens is, the standard story for a product like ours is teenager is going to see their pediatrician. And now part of standard of care is for that pediatrician to assess their patient for, anxiety, depression, and other mental health disorders, usually via an assessment like a PHQ or a GAD-7. Maybe Ellipsis is part of that as well in certain clinics. But ultimately, there is that initial assessment where the provider has identified the symptoms of depression. And at that point, the options for the provider are usually to refer to a therapist. Sometimes it's a psychiatrist, sometimes it's a psychologist, sometimes it's a licensed clinical social worker or LMFT. They could prescribe medication themselves, but it's very rare in pediatrics. Usually they're referring out. The problem is most of the time those referrals go unfollowed for a number of reasons, including financial and logistical stigma as well. Frankly, if you haven't tried to find a Medicaid adolescent psychologist for your child, you don't really understand the struggle that most parents in this country go through. So ultimately, for a number of reasons, you can't find somebody. And so it's the pediatrician who's left to do the sole mental health care, which is limited. Unfortunately, they don't have the time for it. They don't see patients often enough or long enough to really provide good care when it comes to treating depression. And so in our case, we've built this app called SparkRx. It's designed to treat adolescent depression. We've run multiple clinical trials showing efficacy compared to the control arm. And the idea is the doctors will authorize it for the patients. They download it before they even leave the office if they like, and they're going through it on their own. And relevant data is provided back to the provider via the EHR integration or through a standalone portal. And it's one of those scenarios where you don't need a provider on the other end. There is no logistical barriers to scale for products like ours. It's not a tech-enabled services business where you have therapists on the other end who ultimately will end up having wait lists. It's pure software, similar to the avatar that Mainul was describing, right? We have an avatar as well in our product. It's been tested very thoroughly on teens. And as a company, we're building additional therapeutics targeting additional mental health disorders that are prevalent in the teenagers.
And then what are you measuring as outcomes? So are you, according to regulatory, are there certain things that are required for you to measure out and report back? Yeah. So
it's not required. So, the FDA, the agency doesn't specify a very individual assessment. They'll say, our case, we use the PHQ previously, we're using a clinician-assisted diagnostic for one of the upcoming trials we're doing. It really just depends. That's our primary endpoint, though, is a depressive scale of some form. Usually the PHQ, and we usually the PHQ because it's the one most commonly used within pediatrics, which we see as having the biggest use case for us. Okay. One of the questions for us from Richard was where we are in the FDA process. We are currently live under what's called the discretionary enforcement authorization due to COVID-19. So because of the exacerbated need from the pandemic, we are allowed to go to market early. We are not yet cleared. We are running our final pivotal trial right now. Previous trials have all had fantastic results, but we needed to make some changes to the product that we thought would make it better going into release. And it's one of the things about being in a regulated space, you can't just constantly update your product. So we made those updates, are running a last trial now. We expect to see good results because the changes were not clinical in nature. And so we'll submit our 510K early next year.
Yeah, so I think that's a challenge for digital therapeutics in general, the way the approval funnel works, because when you're working with AI and adaptive experiences and needing to personalize and target content to the individual and where they're at, the current framework doesn't support any of that. And in order for, I think for a
I think
one-off,
that was true. It's no longer true, by the
no
way.
longer true. I think they've caught up, especially the last 2.5 years. They have
Yeah.
so how do you update in real time?
You're approving your algorithm. So the algorithm that you
Okay.
build is what gets approved, and so you show that this algorithm works. And they understand that software is not the same as a drug, and so there is that flexibility.
And what about the content? Is it all pre-approved in advance, so you can't react, or you have to go through a funnel on that?
So there is
because we've
flexibility.
found that a key driver of retention. And I mean, look, we've looked at the mental health app retention data. It's bad. It's even bad in the studies. We had 23% of our MAUs last month using Tripp 12 months or longer.
Which is great.
Right? So, but what we found is it's constant content updates to drive that engagement, right? And
that is a question for the regulatory experts. My guess is your content would likely need to go through, but the agency is getting more flexible.
Yeah.
And I would not be surprised if there's options there. That's it. I don't know of any pure meditative apps that have gone through the FDA. To be clear, these are usually apps targeting very specific disorders, either as a diagnostic or as a treatment. And so
even anything chronic that you want to address, the engagement has to be. We have just seen, especially in younger people, that the novelty of that first time effect wears off very quickly, and it requires new content and updates to keep them interacting with the intervention.
Absolutely. And you could query FDA. You could also have an agency that allows you to have those canned responses to be part of the approval process, so that you can keep changing the content, but you have the whole library of content available for them. So they do allow for that level of flexibility these days.
Yeah, the only problem with that, though, is a lot of the participant groups don't reflect the actual population using the application, right? It's not broad enough.
Yes.
So we've learned so much by having over 6 million sessions where we have been analyzing the usage patterns. There isn't a study out there that has had that kind of scale.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's why there's a big divide between consumer health products and going through the FDA to be cleared when it comes to a very specific disorder and the specific population. And financially, we've seen far more success to date on the consumer health side because of that.
Well, I do think, though, you can look at it as foundational, though, generating the operational framework, the engagement models that
absolutely,
when you target a specific indication, will actually have a much bigger commercial success in the sense that you've mitigated a lot of the risk that we've seen in these development efforts that go to market. And then there's epic failures because the engagement wasn't hardened, the sales channel hadn't been tested appropriately.
Yeah,
well, I think you brought a good point, which is the data has to be representative of the population. And until about 1993, if you look at most of the studies, women were not even included. Forget the different ethnicities, right? Forget that, right? So I just want to make sure I echo the same thing, that it has to have the balance and a good representation of who it's going to serve.
Right.
And to your point, I think the digital access, like that, the access that you're making available for a diverse population, whether it's diagnostic in your case and therapeutic in future, but also what Nanea is doing and Ben is doing is they're scaling it across population. Now you have a diverse population that engages at a different level, is economically diverse, and also, of course, ethnically and demographically diverse, that allows for a better representation of the population. I'm very excited about going forward with the conversation, but we are getting close to time because we do have several of the disruptors, the future disruptors. You guys are the current disruptors, and then the future disruptors coming through. And I know Mark, you're on too. Okay, perfect. So before we close today, I would love to hear what you see positive that's happening in next 1 to 5 years in your space. Thank you so much for joining. So I will start the reverse order at this time. So Ben, I would start with you, then Nanea, and then Mainul.
So absolutely, our space in digital therapeutics requires reimbursement from both commercial and public health plans.
Yes.
Absolutely critical. And until, let's say, a month ago, we saw very limited reimbursement for the previously cleared products in our space. If you're following Pear and Achilles, they're cleared. They're publicly traded now via SPAC. And it's not a secret that they've really struggled from a reimbursement perspective. However, we are starting to see a lot of positive signs there, particularly the news last week from Highmark with 6 million lives covering every single FDA-cleared therapeutic is a gigantic win for the industry, and we do expect to see more there. My company specifically has been having a lot of conversations with legislators both at the federal and state levels, and again, see really promising signs for Medicaid reimbursement, where it is absolutely critical that Medicaid teams are able to get access to digital therapeutics. So that's starting already, which is really exciting, and we expect to see it continue.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Mainul, you're next.
Look, I think we're talking about sense of presence, right? And sense of presence being connecting all the different dots together, but also sense of presence being showing validation and efficacy, right? Super, super, super critical. And I think we are all driving that forward. I think publications are extremely important, and it's a matter of ethics around that. And I think gratitude towards, Ben, thanks for mentioning Highmark. Highmark is a partner of ours. I think Highmark has an amazing leadership team along with some of our other Cignas and others, right? So we're excited about how we can all together, Limbix and Tripp and Ellipsis actually can make a difference, and we are going to. And we're going to publish, and we're already publishing, right? So super excited about being present together and creating impact.
Excellent. And Nanea, with you, we're going to close.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to clarify, I see all of us as future disruptors as well, not just
Thank
the
you.
ones to be toppled off.
You're leading the disruption. How's that?
Exactly, we're pioneering the disruption.
Pioneering the disruption, yes.
So the thing that I really I'm excited about is that we are on the verge of a massive technology evolution in much the same way in the year 2000 we started to see computing move from the desktop to the hand. It's now moving to the head. And there are advancements that we're privy to with investors like Qualcomm and others in our platform partnerships that are really going to accelerate an ecosystem that is going to drive a lot of innovation and will be disruptive in its nature. And so when you look at how that applies to healthcare, being able to interact with the user in real time and detect certain states of being and give them the tool or the assist or the support to take care of themselves, self-regulate, but then also to access expanded support. I think this is going to be a revolution. And also just shifting the mindset to the way the healthcare system works now, which is very reactive, as opposed to being proactive. I think this is where digital therapeutics, these diagnostics interfaces like Ellipsis, et cetera, will really help make a much healthier community globally overall. And we're already seeing price points lower in these devices, and you're seeing regulatory framework loosen up. So I am incredibly excited as an entrepreneur, as a technologist, about this transition. And I think the industry is going to, 5 years from now, we're going to be looking back at this time, kind of like how we look at the large cell phone image in the conference and everybody giggles. It's we're at that stage, but it is on fire right now, and I'm very excited about it.
Thank you so much. And I would say I enjoyed talking to the panel, and I would call you guys transformative rather than disruptors. So, okay. And then the next panel would be the disruptors coming through. So with that, I will pass it on to Mark. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.